And the second thing is to expect professionalism. People can offer a lot of things and not mean it. And I don't want to scare you into thinking Second Life is a big dirty place, but just protect yourself and know the real life name of who you're working for if it's a substantial amount of money, and know that they're willing to put their privacy on the line for your work. And once you do have that privacy, keep it confidential, but do have more points of contact than just an avatar name and an email address. And it just goes back to being professional. Expect to be treated like someone who's providing for his or her family with the work that you do, if that's what you're going to do. And the third thing is death and taxes. So people always say the one truth about life is death and taxes, and Second Life really hasn't circumvented that. You might be able to kind of only a little bit die in Second Life. You log in at home or whatever, but you do still have to pay your taxes. And if you haven't freelanced before, this one can be really a daunting thing. And I won't go too far into it because we all come from different parts of the world, and I'm no tax attorney at all. But figure this out as soon as you start making money in Second Life. And if you're in the US, always pay estimated taxes. It's just really important, and I wouldn't even mention it if it hadn't become such a huge distraction my first year as a freelance developer. Don't be afraid to request a 1099 from a client or a developer that might hire you, because you do deserve to be treated like a real person. Okay, and so the fourth one is just kind of silly. Wear sunscreen. So I kind of call this wearing sunscreen because it's one of those tips people kind of throw into pop culture. But in Second Life freelancing, it can mean a lot of things. The first, don't get burned by not working with companies that don't feel legitimate or unscrupulous, but mostly because getting paid to do this can come with a few shocking adjustments at first. You need to protect yourself from that, because you do sort of step out into the sunlight, so to speak. And when you're creating items for clients, it's going to be a lot different than creating something for yourself. Your sense of purpose sort of needs to adjust, because it's not about you or your art or your expression sometimes. It's about the project as a whole. And you do have to be able to take and effectively respond to criticism. And not only that, you have to be able to work to find a solution with your client. So also along that vein, I think that the most important thing you can do as a Second Life developer is to keep your passion alive. For many folks just getting started in development, Second Life is a hobby, and they're extremely passionate. They're exposed to this world where you can be anything, create anything, do anything, and it's like a drug for us highly imaginative people in a way. But as you begin to merge your real life with this existence in the form of financially supporting yourself with it, things do start to change. And you begin to really rightfully put more pressure on yourself and take it just as seriously as you would any other career in any other field, because the certain amount of lighthearted freedom that creating gave you does sort of, I don't want to say die, but it starts to change. And you have looming deadlines, and you basically just need to be creative on command constantly as opposed to on your own terms. So it does frustrate the previous system you use for accomplishing exciting things. I think the most important part of being successful at your job as a Second Life artist or developer is really to try and keep as much of the creative passion alive as you can. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about my favorite thing, which is building and designing things. So working for the NMC, most of the projects I deal with are geared specifically at learning-centered content. So I spend a lot of time learning about its relationship to design. To me, creating is a lot like learning, in that there are many different types and approaches. Those that are those approaches that are a little nonlinear in perspective can kind of get lost in the shuffle if you don't work twice as hard to recognize and cultivate your own potential. We all have different learning styles and building styles, even as equally rational and intelligent people, we have different ways of seeing things or paying attention to different details or aspects of the same problem. And that's what's great about Second Life, is that we have such a variety of different perspectives within one world. And what's exciting to me about Second Life, or more specific to this session, is that designing in Second Life, it's this amazing learning environment in so many ways. But because builders and designers, we're logging in with our imagination bandwidth, if you will, we're also making our learning styles evident just by creating in the space. So just for example, we'll see a lot of visual learning of design in Second Life, people visiting their favorite builds, looking at how they're made, visually taking note of how prims are linked, how the textures are placed on an object. I think that once you've spent, I don't know if you guys have had this experience, but once you've spent, a lot of time in Second Life creating, no one can really keep a secret about how something was built from you. You just see that object and your mind can just dissect it, or you can right-click edit and see how it was put together. And I don't think that mimicry is, as a form of learning, is necessarily a bad thing at all. Once you start to get the feel of how objects are made, you can really see how simply most things are put together, and you can start to develop your own personal style and brand of creativity that way. And we also see a lot of auditory or verbal learning through building classes, aligning ourselves with mentors, conferences, of course, communicating with people, and doing the same goals that we aspire to. But I think the most interesting one to me is that we have this kinesthetic style and kinesthetic learning. And what's incredible to me about Second Life is that once you've spent enough time here, it does have a tactile quality to it. When I was learning to build, it was literally tactile, in that I was making a sculpture and feeling distance and relative positioning with my mouse. And it was really exciting to me to have that outlet. And it's one that I found myself leading with, and it's often where I go to when I'm stuck today. So the tactile, the physical approach is very important. If you saw Chris's session, you remember that when we make a sim plan, we block it out. We block out each structure before we even think about really how we want it to look. So there are these learning principles that the educators we work with are applying to their curriculum, and we apply them in virtual space, and it's just really a great place to start for design in general. I find I do really tend to, I guess, see things through the scope of learning now that it's my job. But going back, there were always these same principles in every Second Life project I've done, even in corporate projects. The first thing that I think about when I'm developing a sim is what the space is. And in many ways, this has nothing to do with the buildings or the landscape or the larger parts of the space, but really just a place is in the details, and a place is not just the function, but also in the use. It's interesting working with educators that request builds that are virtual replicas of real-life campuses, because campuses themselves are a lot like Second Life. They are community shared spaces with individual niches, community-driven details. And just for a quick example, in the various projects, I've been asked quite a few times actually to create a tree, and not just any tree, but a very specific tree, which holds a socially driven meaning that's a shared symbol for the people that use the space. And in each of these cases, it was a tree that had a name, and people passed it by each day. It was a shared symbol for the space itself. And this is really the kind of thing that I love to see brought into Second Life. So the idea of shared symbols is one that really interests me in Second Life, because I came in tune with it as a sculpture artist. But it's these details that make a project for a client sometimes. Finding ties and connections are not necessarily connections with reality, as much it is with the avatars that will use the space, the avatars that share that reality.